This is PHTV Channel 4 in Palos Heights. I'm Sue Jankowski, and today we are on Spotlight. Today's Spotlight is on education. We've had a couple programs on education, and you may remember us talking to teacher George Fear before, way back in the fall. So George, thanks for coming back and
be here.
Visiting with us. Thank you so much. And George is a teacher at Carl Sandburg High School, and we talked about the pandemic and the impact on teaching and teachers and so on. So we'd like to just have another conversation about, you know, what happened after that and going forward, what are our expectations. But first, George, we're going to talk a little bit about you. I mean, you live right here in Palos Heights. You teach, you know, in the district and of District 230, and you have kids yourself. And I just learned that George's wife is also a teacher. So I'm thinking this is a whole family where really this whole pandemic just affected the way you do your job, the way your wife does her job, and the way your kids are learning. So maybe just talk a little bit about how that was, trying to juggle all of this in your house.
It was interesting. Try to paint a picture for what our day looked like. My wife was teaching remotely from our bedroom. Each one of my kids had a corner in the basement. We kind of made makeshift desks for them. And then I was either in the kitchen or in my son's room, or
you were fluid.
I was moving around. So I had a little bit more space in my schedule to check on the kids, so that was kind of more my responsibility. My wife's schedule was jam-packed. I mean, it was like 25 minutes of a break, and that was basically it throughout the whole day. So she was exhausted. So I would try to go down there and check on the kids, and they had different breaks. So then it was managing their breaks and not, you know, being on each other's Zoom meetings and messing around in the background and, like, you know, that kind of stuff.
Especially as they got more comfortable.
Right.
You know, at first everybody's focused.
Everyone was straight and narrow in the beginning. And then it became, you know, they're sneaking up behind each other. And
siblings will do that.
Right. You know, and they're 7, 8, and 9. So they're really tight in age. And they're close.
Yes.
And they know each other's friends in classes. So they're, you know, wanting to you know, mess around a little bit. And then you get like, okay, you get a break. Did you finish your math homework? Yeah, my math homework's done. And then you get the email, you know, your son hasn't completed math in you know, a week, you know. So we thought we had everything under control. We had nothing under control. Yeah. But they adapted pretty well to it. And I thought, as chaotic and crazy as that was, we at least had enough space because of the basement to spread the kids out. I feel like other families had really, really tough. So we were fortunate, as chaotic as it was, as much as there was this pressure of trying to teach, and then the kids coming up and like asking for lunch or asking for, and, you know, like, you gotta go. I'm working right now. You know that.
Yeah.
I feel like we forgave, you know, teachers who had those same distractions, and you know, I hope that my students were able to forgive me through those distractions.
You know, it seems to me, in talking to parents and kids and so on, that there was a lot of flexibility, forgiveness. Hey, we're really all in this ship together, so we have to make this work.
Right.
And there are going to be glitches, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And I mean, walking downstairs and seeing the way my kids' teachers, how hard they had to work, I felt like every elementary school teacher should have gotten a raise instantly, with just the focus that like how they were juggling, trying to teach content, trying to keep kids engaged, checking in on students. I don't know, it was impressive. And then I felt like I was entering a space that I didn't belong. Like, I'm just walking in to check on make sure the kids are on task, but then it's like, wait a minute, I shouldn't hear what the teacher's saying right now. You know, this isn't right. So it was uncomfortable. In that way, but I just felt like the teachers worked so hard for my kids, so I was really happy for them. And I saw how hard my wife was working as well, and yeah, it was a lot.
It was a lot. I agree. I think I mentioned earlier that I was 2 days a week. I was with my granddaughters and they were in different areas, and I didn't have to work. That was my job, just to monitor, make sure that they were able to stay connected and understand. One was a kindergartner. This is all kind of new to her, so I was sitting more by her. But I just thought the same thing with the teachers. I mean, the teachers were phenomenal. The patience I felt to change that content to something that the kids could do and engage in and be rewarded and praised, especially those lower grades, where you really have to keep that up, especially for the kindergartners. So I really feel like they did a great job. The other thing is when they switched to, hey, you guys can come to school, or maybe you want to just stay home. So at least at their school, they had that choice. Well, they stayed home, so they were, the Zoomies at home, and then they had the roomies at school. And those teachers had to do both, engage the learners at school and engage the learners at home. I thought that was even more difficult.
They're doing two jobs.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt. Pretty much our whole year was shaped that way, where we had in-person learners and we had kids that were fully remote. And that was really exhausting. And you're trying to shape lessons for the kids in person to give those kids an opportunity for some normalcy of what school should look like, but then you're neglecting 15 kids at home, so that's not right. So it was really difficult to try to engage everyone. The only way you could do it is if the kids in person were logged into the Google Meet, and then that kind of defeated the purpose of them being there. Well, if you're logging into a Google Meet and you're just staring at kids on a screen, why are you here? So I tried to limit that as much as I could, but it became impossible if we were trying to have a full group class discussion about something. So that was challenging.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the same challenge my wife had throughout the whole year. Even when they went in person, many of her students were home and you're doing two jobs. And shifting curriculum and shifting content to make it more manageable for people at home is one thing, but then to shift it back and forth, it was a lot. It's a lot to juggle.
Yeah.
And then you're constantly, you're not getting the feedback as a teacher as quickly. So then you don't know what's working. So
Right.
everything is just slower, and
But yet you have all this to cover in
Right.
the course of a year. So you're like, well, I mean, at some point you have to kind of pick and choose what are the primary things I want the students to go away with, because
Right.
you're not going to be able really to accomplish as much as you could have.
Correct.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Yeah. So as my memory goes, at the high school level, they started doing coming into the classroom in groups, A, B, C, D. They came in for that one day, and then they were home the other days. And did that change then over time, where they actually came more and more?
Yes. Then it shifted to an A-B schedule. So 50% were Monday, Tuesday. The other 50% of students were Thursday, Friday. Everybody was fully remote on Wednesday.
Okay. So then did the people who were coming to school on Mondays and Tuesdays, did they then flip? And on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, they were the remote learners.
Right.
Okay. How did the kids adapt to that?
I think it was challenging for them because you're in person on Monday and Tuesday, that being home for that stretch of 3 days, it just felt like when they were coming back to school on Monday, they were lethargic. It was a different, they were out of a rhythm, they were out of a consistency. And it was almost like the purpose of that schedule was to try to create some consistency. And I think as the decision makers were going through this, I think they were right. I thought it was going to give them a level of consistency, but I think in actuality it didn't. So I think that was difficult for them to adapt to.
Yeah.
It's also, in high school, your test and quiz day is Friday. So the kids in person on Friday were taking those tests and quizzes in person, and then the kids were taking them at home. So the Thursday, Friday kids felt like the kids at home had an advantage over on these tests and quizzes. So there was some of that, and then
I could see that.
most days where most kids were absent, the in-person learners was of course Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So there was it was difficult for them, and it was difficult to manage.
Yeah.
From the teaching perspective too.
And at that high school level, I think a lot of parents still were at home. monitoring their kids or not, whatever, because they're a little bit older. They don't need, someone over their shoulder all the time. But at that point, some of those parents could be not home, and maybe they've gone back to work or, assuming whatever duties they have, and those kids are left at home, which there certainly can be, but are they doing what they should be doing?
Right. And I think that's what's hard. I think as that question was the main question as we were getting into this. Like, how are we going to know what the kids are doing?
Right.
And at some point, you have to just say, well, we don't, and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And then it became difficult too. I think a lot of the expectations are, if a student's struggling, we have to contact the parents and engage those conversations. And I agree with that, but contact the parents during a pandemic when their kid's English grade might be, 155 on the list of issues that are really going on at home. So trying to be respectful of that part of what's going on too.
Right.
The inability to have the one-on-one conversation with the remote learner, John, can you stay after when everybody logs off for a minute? And it's just like this alert system to everybody that, John's having a problem.
Right.
So it's like you don't want to call them out. It's much easier to do in person.
Yeah.
To have those conversations.
Say, just need to talk to you with it. Yes, it's much more private.
Correct.
But you would almost think it's not, because if you said, I want to talk to you privately, then you really are privately. But if you're in a classroom, there's a bunch of people around.
Right.
But it actually works the opposite way.
Because you can approach that student not before the bell's going to ring, I need you to stay after class. It's not that. It's as their way out. Hey, what's going on? We're missing a few things. What
Right, which works
tell
better
me what's happening
for high schoolers. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So, okay, you had to kind of switch gears, change your lessons. I mean, did you think now in the future, when hopefully things are going back to normal, did you think, okay, I never did it this way before, but this is actually good. I learned something. Or are you kind of thinking, okay, we got through it, I don't have to do it that way again?
I think the learning management system of Canvas that we used, I will keep using.
But you hadn't used that before?
I'd used it only for summer school classes. I'd never used it throughout the school year. I kind of had my own system that I would use. But I'm gonna stick with using that management system for the class.
Okay.
I'm gonna stick with ranges of due dates. So I think prior to the pandemic, I was always very okay, so your assignment's Monday, it's due Wednesday, and that's your due date. And then whatever the assignment might be on Thursday or it might be on Friday, I wouldn't assign it till Wednesday, where I'm going to give them a little bit more. Okay, so this week, these are the things that we're going to cover, and be a little bit more upfront with them. I think I wasn't the type of kid who would ever get ahead of anything. I'm if it's due Saturday, I'm doing it Friday.
Right.
I was never that kid. But I think our students' schedules are so jam-packed that they appreciate knowing this is what I'm going to have, and I can maybe get this done prior. So I think I'm going to play with that organization of the class a little bit more moving forward, because I would pretty much post the week's assignments on Monday or on Sunday night, and then we would go through our lessons each day, targeting the outcomes that I wanted for those assignments.
And you hadn't done it that way prior to that?
I hadn't done it that way.
Okay.
I had a sketch in my head of what the week or what the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks, depending on what we're doing, is going to look like. Mm-hmm. And then those assignments would roll out daily or every couple of days. Mm-hmm. But I like the idea of giving the kids some flexibility to be able to get ahead of what their tasks might be. And I always felt like I didn't want to give them that because I didn't want them to read ahead. I didn't want them to take the discussion in a place where some kids hadn't read that part yet. But really, that's always happening.
Yeah.
You always have kids who are behind in the reading, so that I think that's okay. So I've shifted my perspective a little bit on that. In terms of the tech tools and the bells and whistles and the gadgets that we were trained to use and have access to, mm-hmm. I don't know how much I'm going to keep using.
All of that when it's not needed, when you're there in person and you can actually, physically, yeah. Well, it almost sounds like the planning process had to be so much more than, the traditional planning. I'm here, I've got all my materials right here,
Right.
and I don't have to figure out multiple ways to present that same topic. Did you find you were spending a lot more time in preparation?
A lot more preparation. I think when you get out of that first 5 or 6 years of teaching, me probably longer than most teachers, the planning you can chop down because you've done it. So you can go in with how you want to approach something. It doesn't have to be your plan doesn't have to be so rigid. I felt like this year I had to go back to almost being a first year teacher and really write out, okay, this is how I want to do this. This is what I need to get to. If I don't get to this, I need to go back. We need, it was more of less of a feel, less of the art of it, and a little bit more of the process of I need to take these steps to make sure that I'm covering this material or covering this lesson, which made it more transactional, and it made it kind of shallow. So I think if you're asking about a change for next year, I think it's not necessarily a change, but it's a recognition that some of this learning for the kids was shallow and transactional. And if their view of school, and I'd had sophomores, their view of school is shallow and transactional coming out of last year, and this year I'll have sophomores again, so they were freshmen, so their first high school experience was this. I need to make sure I engage them in what authentic learning can be, and not just, here are the tasks, do the tasks, and then I'll give you feedback on the tasks. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the challenge moving into next year. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Flipgrid or the other tech tools that are really easy to use, and exposing those tools to the kids I don't think is all that valuable because they're so easy to use. So if they need to learn how to use those tools, they can. Yeah. It's not, I don't feel like I need to spend that time with them. I think what I need to do next year is try to reclaim some conversation, get them to engage with each other, have an opportunity for me to engage with them, which was so lacking, and try to find some enjoyment in school.
Well, especially you had sophomores. Okay, they had been in school, freshmen. Now you're going to have kids who hadn't really attended high school very much. I mean, they did eventually get there, but it's kind of like a first experience for them.
It is.
Too.
And so I think that's really important. I think I have to shape my class with that understanding that, there's content that we need to get to, but there's also authentic learning that a tone needs to be established of. This is, guys, it's not just, fill out the handout, turn it in, let's be done. Let's engage with content. Let's discuss content. So I'm reading a book right now that talks about communicating in the digital age. It's not necessarily coming out of a pandemic, but I'm going to try to steal some nuggets from that to give kids more opportunities to engage with each other in class. And I think that will hopefully create more of an authentic experience and more a genuine desire to be at school, which I think is what we need to give kids, because they were learning from their beds for a year.
Yeah, sitting there. Now, I also think because kids spend so much time on these little phone screens and they communicate with each other that way instead of like in person, that being together in person in a room and actually having that communication is, so valuable and so needed. What you say to somebody face to face and what you say, when you're expressing your thoughts in a group of people, that's so different than all this social media type stuff.
Correct. And I would think that is going to be capital in the future. Kids that have grown up in this digital age, who can communicate so quickly and so rapidly and can be plugged into their phones and be reached very easily, I think the capital for them is going to be, can you communicate in person? How are you in presenting to a group? How are you at being able to answer questions? How are you in an interview process? How are you at evaluating other people's interpersonal skill sets? And I think that is going to be their capital kind of moving forward into their careers. So I think we got to start with that in class. And that's a lot of what this book is called, Reclaiming Conversation. that I've been reading, and that's though it's giving strategies for kids now who've grown up in this age, how they can kind of unlock some of those conversation or social insecurities, because even adults do it now, right? If we're in a uncomfortable situation around strangers, everybody just kind of hides behind their phone, right? So we don't engage the stranger in a conversation.
Right.
We hide our phone. We hide behind our phone, and we look and act and pretend to be busy.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I think kids have become really good at that. So how do we start to unlock some of that social anxiety? And social anxiety, and I don't want to. I think there's real issues in social anxiety that needs to be treated. So I don't want to put those two things in the same category, but I think.
No, but just as an adolescent, you know, yes. you do have that.
Right.
Adults do too. You know, when they're speaking in front of a group, or you know, you have something to say with people you really don't know that well. You're just wondering, should I say that? Is it going to make me look odd or funny? Or am I speaking out in the wrong way?
Right.
You know, the thing is too, I'm wondering, did you hear a lot from the parents? Because now the education is really in their face. You know, if they're paying attention, they are hearing the teacher talking, and they are hearing their child's responses, or they are able to see what is their child doing. And I don't know, you know, at some level, as your kids get older and older, you release your hovering over what they're doing, because they're old enough. You know, they should be able to take care of some of these things. But yet, I'm thinking now this is a whole new thing for parents to really be observing their children learning.
I felt really fortunate. The feedback I got from parents was positive. It was supportive. A lot of parents who did reach out, you know, even at parent-teacher conferences, enjoyed the feedback that I was giving their students on their assignments, which I've never gotten in 15 years of teaching. I've never heard a parent say, you know, I really like the feedback that you provided on an essay, because the kids weren't showing their parents that, but it was kind of part of that. They're going in to check to see if they've completed the assignments, and then the feedback is there, and then they're kind of jostling through and they're seeing some of that feedback. So I thought that was interesting. It also kind of struck like, wow, you better be very careful with how you're critiquing some of these assignments. You know, so it put a little bit of pressure that way.
It would, yeah.
January 7th was one of the most difficult days of teaching that I think I've ever had, after the Capitol insurrection incident, whatever we want to refer to it as, and trying to address questions from sophomores who don't have their cameras on while they're asking the questions about what was going on was difficult, and knowing that the parents could be sitting right next to them in some of these. In my responses, so they had to be measured. Yeah,
you almost want to say, well, this is something you should talk to your parents about.
Right, but clearly they're asking the question, and not a lot of questions were asked throughout the year. It's an uncomfortable place to ask a question in a Google Meet. But they were asking those questions, which means they wanted adult interaction that wasn't their parent. So that was hard. It was hard. Those were because it was so raw, it was so fresh for me. I was trying to unpack it. And then they were
and coming up with the answer when there really wasn't an answer at that point. So you know, still not an answer.
No.
So yeah, that is tough. But you know, I feel like teachers do get asked a lot of tough questions that sometimes, you know, parents aren't aware of, that are you know, you're trying to do your best to guide that student, but you also have to be careful, because you don't know what would the parent want you to say. You know, it's just it's hard.
That part is hard, and I think that's your job if you're a high school teacher, especially. I think, and maybe it starts to happen in junior high, but I think your job is to be on the front lines of some of those difficult conversations. And when you're in high school, you don't really want to have some of those conversations with your parents.
No, that's true.
You know, so you have those conversations with your teachers, or you have those conversations with your coaches or your sponsors, and I think that's part of the job, and you have to be able. You can't just back off from it all the time and say, "Well, you got to talk to your parents about that."
Yeah,
you can't. You have to. You got to meet kids where they are a little bit, and
you're the safe adult to talk to.
You're supposed to be. You know, so
right. Okay. Now I'm wondering too. with the extracurricular things that take place in a school, and I know you're involved in sports, and so some of that kind of went by the wayside. And did that start up again? And were the parents like real? Do they feel kind of adamant about we want this for our kids, and we want to get this started up, whether it's a club or political stuff in school, meaning like a school, your class
Right.
treasurer or whatever. Is that going to start up the same? Did it ever get off the ground?
It started. It was delayed. So we were in District 230 was in a strange place because our coaching and co-curricular stipends were not approved. The contracts weren't approved to start them like they normally would be. Day one, August 15th, you'd sign your contract. They weren't ready. Because they weren't sure if they were going to run, and then if they weren't going to run, they weren't going to pay the coaches or the sponsors for activities that didn't run. And so this was like hung up for a while, and then eventually they ran, and we signed our contracts, and we started our clubs. So all clubs ran. They were modified. They were difficult. I sponsor National Honor Society and Future Teachers Club, and I work with the school newspaper as well. So all those meetings were fully remote. There was nothing in person. Even as kids, 50% of the schools came back. Those clubs stayed remote because you had so many students who were fully remote. So trying to
do both. So they were just
impossible, right? It's like it's kind of like trying to teach kids at home and kids in person. So they stayed remote, and then baseball. I coach baseball, and that started a month later than normal. So we usually start that last week of February or the first week of March, depending on the calendar. We didn't start till April 5th or something like that.
That's pretty good, though. I mean, considering everything.
Yeah,
that wasn't too bad.
It wasn't too bad. Considering other sports were delayed further, and football lost 3 weeks of their season and had no playoffs. So we were able to have a postseason and able to play pretty close to a full schedule. So.
Did you find any of the college-bound students I'm sure they were frustrated, like, well, what am I going to do? Even like taking a college visit, I'm not even sure kids could do that. They can't go on a tour with their parents looking at schools. So that seemed like a really frustrating thing for them.
I had so many conversations with seniors last year that applied to more than 10 schools. Because they had no idea where they wanted to go.
No.
So they were just they were throwing applications out there, and they were seeing where they could get in, and then they were kind of whittling it down from there. And that's usually not the process. And I don't know, our guidance counselors would steer them away from that. Oh, that's too many. Like, have more of a plan of where you think you want to go. So kids, they were applying to a lot of schools. And then in terms of athletes, that's a really difficult process if they're going to play in college, because NCAA granted those student athletes an additional year who were already college players. So now those kids are going into a circumstance where students would have normally have graduated, so the program would be kind of turning over, and now those kids are still there. So they're walking into programs where they're 23-year-olds or could be 24-year-olds are still there because they've been granted an extra year.
Yeah, which
it's difficult for those kids as well. So the signing period for our student athletes was challenging too. There's just not enough roster spots.
No. Okay.
Because kids didn't graduate.
Right. Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, so now going forward, we have the CDC changing things, do this, don't do that, then, do that, don't do this. And, it's just nobody's fault. I mean, this is a fluid thing.
Right.
We're just discovering all the facts and so forth. But I know I listened to a woman last night who was talking to her school board. I think this was out in California, and she was adamant that, what she does with her children is up to her, period, the end. And, I do understand that. And it was regarding wearing a mask or school not being in session or having a vaccine or whatever. She didn't want any government intervention. But, the CDC is still recommending that unvaccinated youngsters still mask up. Now, I'm not sure if the school can even monitor that. I mean, who knows who got a vaccine? Do they have to show that? Will they be wearing masks if they're not vaccinated, or just like everybody wear a face protection? Do you know how that's going to roll out?
We do not. At this point, we haven't gotten any guidance from the district in terms of what the mask mandate will be. They're going to follow Illinois Department of Public Health, which is what the district's done. And so when those guidelines are come out, and obviously Illinois Department of Public Health is following CDC, so it's it's kind of that trickle down of government agencies that
Yeah.
they're going to follow.
Okay. And that probably won't happen until, another month or so.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think my kids aren't old enough to get the vaccine. So,
Right.
Under those current rules, they would be still wearing masks. And their teachers potentially wouldn't have to if they were vaccinated. So I think that's an interesting circumstance. I mean, even going into the store, if I'm in the store with my kids, they're not vaccinated. So based on what the sign says outside the store, they should wear a mask. So
Yeah.
if they're going to wear it, I'm not going to walk in without one.
Right.
That's not right. So
No.
I'm going to wear a mask because they're wearing a mask. So
Yep.
I think there's just, and people are going to have their own opinions.
Yeah.
I do find it ironic when people talk about they don't want any governmental interference as they're using the public school. I think that's interesting, and an interesting take on what's happening and what their decisions are for their kid. So it's
we're dealing with a gigantic worldwide problem, and I think the government is doing all that they can do to keep people safe. So it's kind of like you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Correct.
Because it's if the government doesn't have any guidelines, well then why isn't the government doing anything?
Right.
And then if they have guidelines, well why are they interfering?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
and
it's really hard. I don't envy the decision makers. It's a
it
difficult
really
position
is.
to be in.
It's just really tough. So I don't know what's going to happen either. I know all my little ones in my life are all wearing masks, and I do the same thing when I'm with them. I wear one too. Let's just be a group,
Right.
and let's try and be safe. It's all been very challenging. But out of all of this, it sounds like you've learned so many things about becoming probably, even a better teacher than you were before, because you've got a different perspective on the things that are important to kids and the parents and technology and planning and all of those things that you've been doing. So if you wrap all that up, it can't help but be positive for you in a unfortunate way that we had to go through all this. You know what I mean?
I think that's probably true of most difficult experiences that you go through. When you're in it, it's hard and it's challenging and it's exhausting. And then when you come out of it, you feel stronger. You feel like you've done something, that you feel like you can get through something.
Right.
That's difficult. So I think it's definitely put some chinks in the armor kind of thing. But I think it's probably made me a little more empathetic of like the whole circumstance of the student. And it's not that I didn't think about that before, but now you're really dialed in and really thinking about like watching my 7-year-old in first grade trying to complete assignments and get frustrated and like man, this is hard.
Yeah.
And the 17-year-old can have the same difficulties and same struggles, and there's got to be a point where we have to be empathetic, we have to be understanding, we have to push the right buttons too, though, and make sure that they're accomplishing what they're supposed to, and that we're getting the best from them, and so that it's that balancing act constantly. And I think it's always existed, but I think I'm a little more aware now of just from seeing it from my own kids, and then going through some of the difficulties and the challenges that seeing what some of my students have dealt with. I hope that makes us all a little bit more empathetic, maybe a little kinder.
Yeah, exactly, a little kinder. And the other thing is, I think sometimes when you're not aware of what goes on in a classroom, if you're not in education, you're not there, you wouldn't know. But when you look at the classrooms, as I was doing, and you see that there are all kinds of different learners, and you're actually watching them, and you're thinking, wow. that teacher has to make that child get to, from point A to B by the end of the year, and that is a huge challenge, So I always have great respect for teachers, but it's even blossomed more. I mean, the patience, the perseverance, the changing by the minute, it's really been, I draw tons of roses to the teachers. They've done great.
I especially felt that way with elementary school teachers. I could not have asked for a better circumstance for my own kids. And even when they got to go back to school, they were excited to be able to get back.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I really appreciate what they've done for my kids. And just how do you, just seeing a kid, it's like the most important part of what we do is like, so you gotta see the people in front of you, and like to make my kids feel like they had been seen even though they were home, and then excited to go back and see their teachers.
Yeah.
That's great.
That was great. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And the only way they could do that is they created a culture within those first few weeks when they were fully remote, that they were loving and kind and
supportive and complimentary, and
Right.
they were real cheerleaders.
Correct.
And they did fantastic.
They really did.
George, thank you so much for coming in today, and thanks for your part in being an educator, because, boy, was that a challenging year for the whole country and the whole world. But teachers really had a special place in the lives of kids and parents and everybody else. So thanks a lot for being there.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Good to see you. And that's it for our Education Spotlight today. I hope you enjoyed our program, and we'll see you next time on Spotlight. Bye-bye.